Okay. Welcome, everybody. So as Farah said, first of all, I wanted to thank Farah for inviting me over. This is such a pleasure for me to be with you today. Farah has been through my Udemy course, so she knows a little bit. I don't really like PowerPoint slides that much, and especially when you're dealing with flows, I think it's important that you experience things and then that you see how things are done instead of being presented on slides. This is what flows do, and these are the rules related to flows, what to do, what not to do. I think that's a little bit less helpful than seeing things for yourself. I usually go through a couple of flow examples and then I show how things are built. Considering that this is a developers meeting, I wanted to go through a couple of more advanced examples. And I prepared some examples related to scheduled paths for you. And we can have discussions around what works in an effective and efficient way in terms of performance. How do we get rid of governance limits, or at least work around them, things like that. And as I'm presenting, obviously you can ask questions anytime you want. This is going to be a chat and a discussion more than a presentation. Are you able to hear me well? Okay, sounds good. Let me share my screen. And also please check whether you see my screen well or not. I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger. Let me just close a couple of tabs here. Let me just work on my browser a little bit to make my fonts and screen a little bit bigger. Okay, so this is a winter 22 instance, a preview instance. So what I usually do is I have this preview instance that I opened a couple of releases back. Some of you may already know this and some of you may not possibly. What happens is when you sign up for a preview instance, Salesforce gives you an instance on what they call GS0. You know how they have servers, North America 13, 15, whatever, and whatever it is in Europe or in Middle East. We usually have our orgs and instances running in one of their data centers. So once they give you a GS0 instance, a developer preview org, you can keep that as long as you don't get that one expired. It actually receives the latest preview whenever it's time for you to experience that, whenever they roll it out. So you can always use the same org to do your exploration for the new release. So that's another trick that I use. I usually put a picture on my profile that reminds me what this org and instance is used for. Every release, I put the new logo on here. This time I haven't done it yet, so that's going to be replaced over here. This is from summer 21. So I was invited to an Albany user group meeting before, and it was a developer user group meeting, and I prepared a demo for them. And I want to start off by showing you what I have done for them, and then we are going to explore around that demo and make few changes and see how things work when we make changes on those flows. So this is a use case where we are dealing with loans. And let me just make this a little bit smaller so that you can see account payment. And then where is the loan? Whenever I deal with building flows, I like to go to Schema Builder and then see how the objects relate to each other. Obviously, if they are standard objects, most of the time I know the relationship. Sometimes I have to remind myself. But if I'm dealing with custom objects that I have created earlier or custom objects that somebody else has created, it is important to understand all the relationships in the fields on those. Now, in this demo, I have created two custom objects. One is loan, and the other one I called payment for loan because I realized my preview org actually had an object called payment. So this is the custom object that I have created. It is not very, very complicated. The idea is you have a loan that the account will request, and you are going to create on their behalf. So they are loaning money from your business, and you will create one record, one active record for each account. And this loan is going to have a loan amount and then loan status. And then there will be fields on the loan that will show you the payment total amount, payment total count, remaining balance, and all that good stuff. And you can associate with the loan and the account at the same time, all the payments that come through for that loan. And the payments have fields on the payment amount and the payment date and a checkbox whether that has been processed before or not. So for this use case, I have created a couple of flows. Now, let me show how that works. Let me show you how that works. Wait, where are we? These are my Salesforce tools. Okay, so I have a Stark Industries account. And when I go to my Stark Industries account, I can see on my related lists the loan. And this is my loan record. So the loan amount is $1 million and the payment total amount is $103,000. So obviously I can create records here on the Salesforce platform, on the Salesforce system, in my related lists or by going to the related tab. But I wanted to give the user another way of creating a record by going on to the loan record. Here, what I have done here on my Lightning record page, I dropped a screen flow on the right side so that the user can create a new payment record. Now, in the old days, we used to either deploy a button, a quick action, or something like that that we would use to create a related record. This is a new way that you can use. You can, on your Lightning page, drop a flow, and the flow is going to take the current record ID as an input, and it's going to allow you to process the current record, create a related record for that record that you're seeing on the screen. So here, it starts off with a static screen, which is click next to enter a new payment. And when you enter the payment amount, the payment date, as you can see, I'm using a two-column layout that was made available last release. I think it was summer 21. Before that, we couldn't use two-column layout on screen flows. And I'm entering, well, I'm sorry, this is the date. Let's choose the current date, today's date. And then I can enter that the payment was made using a credit card. And then when I click next, the flow is going to tell me a new payment record has been created. So I can go to my related lists and see all the payment records and see as well that I have created one today with my Eastern Daylight Time at 8:15 a.m. for $1,000, right? This is just a simple screen flow that I can use to enter a payment record. So how did I do that? To see that, let me just go back to my loan record and go to my page layout. So the way you deploy that screen flow on your Lightning page is you drop a flow component from your left side to the screen. So you would actually literally take this, drop it anywhere on your screen. This could be also used as a separate tab, by the way. It doesn't really have to be on your default tab. So if you drop this anywhere on your screen, say, I want to put it here, then it is going to ask you which flow do you want to use for this component, right? So I have done all that. Let me just show you. Let's take this away. Let me just show you on here. You get a drop down of all the flows, all the active screen flows that you have on your system. So you choose one. And again, in the old days, we used to have to remember a certain syntax and notation to refer to the current record ID. Now, luckily, that is provided to us. That came also with the last release, I think. So if you say, I want to use the current record ID as an input for loan ID, and I'm going to show you in a few minutes that in your screen flow, you can define variables to pass the current record ID into your flow. And if I have defined the loan ID in my current flow as an input variable, and I can choose here that I want to pass the current loan ID, the record ID, to that variable. And then once I save and deploy all this, which I have done, I don't have to do it again, let me just leave without saving. This is going to all work. That's the screen flow magic on Lightning record pages. Are you, do you hear me, everything? I mean, I don't hear any feedback back, so I just want to make sure everybody's good.
I'm you.
Is everything all right?
Yep.
All right, okay. Don't hesitate to ask questions, whether if I'm too fast, too slow, just let me know, okay?
Yeah, people are following in the chat, and I think if anybody has a question, they can just
Yeah, just know I don't read the chat, so just ask me the question and interrupt me, please.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go to flows and see how I built this. Let me just put this panel to, yeah, let's put it away. Okay, now I have a flow here called enter new payment on loan record flow. Now it shows inactive here because I haven't refreshed my screen. This is actually active. When I go into the flow, you'll see that I'll get a deactivate button, which means it's active. So this is, I mean, it's right now in auto layout format. So it's just a string of a couple of elements. So whenever you want to deploy your flow like that, you want to accept the current record ID as an input, as I mentioned. So, and I think I call that loan ID. It doesn't really matter what I call that inside my flow anymore. I think it used to be important before for some use cases. Now it's not that important. If I go to edit this variable, I'll see here that my variable is marked available for input. This is where the magic happens. So, you know, when you mark this available for input, then when you run the flow is going to ask you that variable value, or if you deploy it on a Lightning page like I did, then it is going to accept that as an input.
Excuse me, Andy, was this variable automatically created, or did you create a loan ID record?
Oh, I created it. So you create it, and then when you're creating it in that dialog, let me just show you. You just mark it as you need to check that. Like, let me just do another one, right? So you do a variable. Whenever we are dealing with IDs, we have to create a text variable because we are going to accept a string of the record ID, and then I can call this. Let's call this record ID, right? This is all I need to do, and mark this right here. So as soon as I do this, and I can have, let's say, 10 variables in my flow that I'm dealing with, and I'm going to mark 3 of them available for input. Whenever I run it, whenever I debug it, the system is going to ask me the values for those 3. And I can also pass 3 values to that using the Lightning page or anything else, or wherever I'm deploying this flow. Does that answer your question, Farah?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
We have another question in the chat, but
yes.
I don't really understand the question. It says, how did account ID update in the record? I think he's referring to the connection between the loan and the account.
Okay, that's the flow magic. I'm going to show you right here. Okay. I'm going to show you. Well, here, let's go through how I created the record, and your answer might be in there. If it's not in there, I'm going to answer. Let me just walk you through this. So this is a screen flow. If you are going to deploy your flow on a Lightning record page like that, it has to be a screen flow. When you go to add the flow component to your or flow element or component, whatever you call them, like in the Lightning terms, when you go to add that on your Lightning page, you are going to only see your active screen flows available to you. So this is going to be a screen flow. So in a screen flow, we have to use, or we can use, screen elements. In no other flow type, we have screen elements available, only in screen flows. So the general rule is, I always tell that to my students or whoever is learning flows. If you have any kind of screen interaction, like you need to show a screen, a static screen, a message, an input area so that the user can input some field values, or any kind of screen message or error message or something like that, you have to use a screen flow. So I chose to use a static screen as my initial screen. The reason being is I don't want to affect the performance of my Lightning page. If I make, let's say, a get element as my first element and then show a screen element, the flow is going to run and perform all those steps until it gets to the first screen element and displays that every time I pull the Lightning record page. I don't want that, obviously, because it's going to possibly impact my performance. It depends on, obviously, how many times the loan records are being pulled in that organization, how many users I have, but it can be an impact. So there's a static message. It just says click next to enter a new payment. Now you do that with the display text component on your left side. You just drag it on here, and then you enter the information. And then the next one is my input screen. So when you are collecting input from your left side, you just drag all these fields on here, and this is where we are using the 2-column setup. Oh, well, actually, this is not a 2-column setup. It's a date and time. I'm sorry. Yeah, I did use the 2-column setup in the other flow, which I'm about to show you, but this is just how the date and time field shows up side by side. So you accept all these variables, you have your pick list, and then if the user selects the other payment type, then they are also presented with a text input of the other payment type. And that's the conditional visibility that we are using over here. So my conditional visibility that is shown here with this logo, the I logo here, that also was made available last release, says only show this input field if the payment type, which is the previous pick list right here, equals other. So I collect that information, and then the first thing I do is I get the loan record. Because I want to use everything on the loan record, all the field values on the loan record in my flow. Sometimes you have to do this, sometimes you don't have to do this. To be honest with you, now I question myself and see whether I have to do this, because you can go from the loan record to the account and whatever, get those field values without getting sometimes. Again, that functionality has been expanded in the last few releases. So once I get the loan record, and in my create step, I'm creating a payment for loan. Now I can use the account, and that should answer your question. Whoever asked the question, thanks for that question. It's very relevant. So I can now pass my account ID from the loan record that I just got. So, and the notation for this is saying, use the account ID from the record variable that Salesforce has just created for me automatically from the get loan step. Use the account ID and pass it to the account on the loan record while you're creating the loan record. So I'm using that, and I'm using the loan ID that the Lightning page passed again to the flow, and all the other stuff. These are all the screen element values that I'm using to create the record. And then I need to show a success screen. A new payment record has been added so that the user knows this all worked. Have we gotten to that stage or not? And then end, that's it. So this is done. This is not a very complicated flow. Yeah.
I have another question.
Sure.
Andy, how do you differentiate between variables when they all have the API name record ID? I think it's because you've mentioned that multiple variables can be available for input. So I think that Mariel got mixed up between having the record ID as an input and having different kinds of variables. They don't.
Yes.
They don't all have to have.
So yeah, I understand the question. I think, yeah, in the old way of doing this, when you are deploying this using a button, I think, quick action and a button, you can do this still like that. When you do that, you need to name your variable inside your flow as record ID. You need to name it in a certain way, like, even whether your letters are capital or small matters. And if you deploy it in the right way, that's the only variable that you are going to accept as an input. You need to mark only one variable as an input. And when you deploy it that way, Salesforce automatically passes the current record ID to that variable. But that's the beauty of this. I mean, here I can have 10 variables that I can make available to be passed to the flow. I don't have that limitation in this kind of deployment. Whether that would make sense in my use case is another question, but I am technically able to do that. I can actually mark 3 variables as an input, and when I go to my Lightning page deployment screen on the right panel, when I drop my flow, I'll see all those 3 input areas, and I can pass something even fixed there. For example, I can say, like, I want to pass a count, let's say. I can just enter 12. That should be possible as well. Does that answer the question?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, perfect.
I have another question, Andy. This is from me. what kind of when do you decide that you are going to create variables? Is it just when you are trying to input something to the screen? So did you create only variables for the input that you have on the screen, like date? I think there was another field for the loan amount. And
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, well, very good question. Now, we use variables for a lot of things, but some of the variables are actually created for us. So, for example, here, when I'm using my screen input elements, and then I say I want to create a currency input component here called payment amount. I can actually refer to this like a variable. It is auto creating actually a variable, the input currency area. So you'll see that over here, when I'm creating my payment, I'm referring to the payment amount as a variable value right here. So that's most of it is auto created for me. So, and if I decide at some point when I'm using, when I'm referring to a value and I need a variable, I can always create a new resource coming from here. Like if I don't plan very well, or if I just decide to be spontaneous, I don't really have to create all my variables up front. I can just go in here and say, I need a text variable and create one right here and then use it immediately. So that's one way of doing it. Or before you get started, if you plan everything out, like, you know, you are all programmers, developers, coders. So if you plan it out, then you can create all your variables up front that you need over here and plan out your flow that way. And if you don't need anything later on, you can just delete it. When you go to delete it, if you used it somewhere and it cannot be deleted, the flow will tell you, the Salesforce platform will tell you saying, this has been used here, so you cannot delete it. You need to delete that element first if you want to delete this variable. Does that answer the question?
Yes, yes, thank you. So basically, the screen components create variables automatically, and you only had to create the record ID or the loan ID variable. Am I correct?
Yeah, yeah. Record ID, loan ID, for example, you're looping and you want a count, then you create a count variable, like encoding, very similar. But most of it is created for you automatically. Again, for example, here in your get loan step, Salesforce creates automatically a record variable, and you can refer to the field values with this notation, like I just showed you right here. And it is auto-named by the element of that that get step. So if I named the get step element get loan, then it is named get loan dot account __ C.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now now we are going to get a little bit more sophisticated, complicated. This is not what I have prepared for developers. Now the next step here is, where am I here? So Stark Industries has a loan that's active, and this is the loan, and they have payments, and obviously I want to know what the loan amount is, which is a static value here that can be edited, but it shouldn't change much once the loan starts. And then I'm adding payments, and I want to know how many payments have been made, and the payment total amount is, and what the remaining balance is. And obviously I can do this in many different ways. I can create a record triggered flow. I can create a lot of things, right? I can deploy this via button. I can schedule something to calculate all this stuff. So because I'm demoing all this like screen flow functionality on Lightning Pages, I decided to do this again in a similar fashion. So when I go to account, let's say I want to go to account, just an explanation for you. I have only one loan account I have only one loan record active for each account. And I'm checking that using a validation rule and the roll-up field. It's a hack or something. So yeah, when the user goes to create another loan record, they get an error message. So the idea here is there will be only one active loan for each account. So you should just know that. So I have deployed another flow here for the user to go to the account record. Let's say the user goes to the account record and then they want to update the current status for that account, all their loans and payments, and they do a review. That's how I want to update the latest status and all the payments on the account. So I have another screen flow here. It says, please proceed to the next screen to update the loan and payment records for this account. So I click next. This is where I use the 2-column layout. You'll see the account name and the account status are two distinct separate input areas, and they have been used in a 2-column format. Again, these display text components as well. No, so what the flow is doing for me, the flow is going and getting all the payments related to the account and counting them, totaling the number. And at the same time, because I also wanted to demonstrate that you don't really have to just do that. You can also give the user the ability to update a couple of things on the account itself. So just for the sake of it, the user is able to also change the account name here. Change, for example, the account name from Inc. to Co. and then change the status, because they are reviewing the account. Now they can assign the account a status of current or a follow-up status. Click next. So once the user clicks next, all records will be updated related to the account, meaning, let me just refresh my screen. I don't know if this got all the values. I haven't really entered the new payment, so those numbers maybe, oh, I did enter a new payment, so those numbers must have changed. So I can see now here $105,504 of payments against $1 million. And I can see here that this record has been updated a minute ago based on my time zone. And you can also see, I'm going to show you in a minute, I'm also marking the payments as processed or not processed yet. You should be able to see also that the payment record here that I have just entered in my previous demo should have been updated as well as of a minute ago and has been marked as processed with this check mark. So how did I do all that? Let's go to my flows again. I think it's this flow right now. Now in my preview org, I have so many flows. I need to get a little bit more organized. So this is going to look a little bit more complicated. What do we have in here? We have gets, a couple of decisions, gets, and then we are looping. And we have updates on related records. Okay. So I'm not going to go into all the details here for the sake of time. I'm going to give you a good walkthrough, but if you want me to focus on a certain aspect, you're curious, just slow me down or let me know, okay? So here we have again our intro screen. It's static. So this solution I try to make very efficient. So it is going to only process whatever it needs. It's not going to unnecessarily make too many DML operations like update steps on our database. Now, it needs to get the account. So because I will use some of the field values on the account. Now, whenever you do a get in your flow, it's a very good idea to check whether you did get a record or not, or did it fail. Now, in this deployment, in this use case, it's kind of silly to check for that. You don't really need to do it because you are passing the account ID from the record that's open on your screen. So there's actually virtually no way that you're not going to get that account record, but it could happen. So general practice, check whether your account record is null, the one that you got, or not. If it's null, just send them to an error page that'll show up on the screen. No open loan exists, or no payment record exists for this account, because I'm sending them also to the same screen, the user to the same screen in the next decision. Now, this question sometimes is asked, why don't we use fault paths? We can use fault paths, but the thing with fault paths is this: whenever you use a fault path and you go down that path, Salesforce sends out an error email. So you need to design and deploy your flow in a way that you will never go down your fault paths. Even if you have them in your flow, use decisions not to go down that path, because it's not good practice to get a bunch of error messages every day. So get records. So what I want to do is I want to get all the loans that have the account ID that equals to the account ID that was just passed to the flow from the Lightning page, and the loan status is not closed. So it's also checking that I'm getting the active loan, because I could have one closed loan and one open loan. And I'm checking again, is the loan null? I'm not going to show that. I just showed you this in a similar way. And I want to get the payments for loan. So I got the loan ID, and I'm using the loan ID to get all the payments. And I'm checking whether I don't have any payments, or do I have payments related to this loan. So I'm doing here something for the sake of performance. If you remember, I just showed you, whenever I process a loan, I actually check a checkbox. Whenever I process a payment, I actually check a checkbox on the payment record. So I can get here only the loans that are not unprocessed. So if the checkbox is not true, I want to get all those payment records, because I still need to process them. I need to add the number to the payments total that I want to update on the loan record. I'm assigning initial values. So meaning I have a variable. This is also related to the question you asked before, Farah. I have a payment count variable. Look, I want to count how many payments are being made. So I created that variable myself. And I have a payment total amount variable I have created as well. And I'm passing to those here the payment total count number that currently exists on the existing open payments, existing open loan record. And I'm assigning also I'm sorry, let me just repeat myself. This is for the count. So I'm assigning the current count number that exists on the loan record to the payment count variable, and I'm assigning the current total amount for the payments on the loan record to my payment total amount variable to initiate those.
So those were the totals that were displayed on the screen flow at first, Andy?
No, those are the totals that are displayed. Let me just show you. On the loan record right here. So when it's getting the loan, I'm getting the loan values for the payment total count, and not the remaining balance, payment total amount and payment total counts, because they have been processed before. So the last time I ran this screen flow, I processed all those payments and I added those and I updated this record with those payments. So I don't need to process those payments again. I just need to know what the previous total is so that I can add the new payment on top of these numbers. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So I got those numbers and I'm checking whether there are any new payments that have not been processed, which happened here in this get step. So if I have any unprocessed payments, I'm going to loop through them. And because of potential performance issues, we don't really want to do any DML operations inside the loop, right? We don't want to do our create update inside the loop because you never know how many times your loop is going to run, and you might actually cause performance issues. You might hit governor limits. So that's why I'm taking and going through the loop, and I'm assigning the current payment to a payment record variable. So I'm taking the current payment record, all the field values, and assigning them to a payment record variable that I have created. This is a container where I want to keep all my values temporarily. And I'm assigning a couple values to my payment record variable. So I'm going to take, well, I've done this twice. It seems like this is unnecessary. This is redundant. So I've done this in my previous step. This can be deleted. So I'm adding 1 to the count of payment counts. So if I have, let's say, 1 unprocessed payments and I loop through this, I'm going to loop through this 1 time. I'm going to add to my payment count 1, the one that exists on the loan record. And I'm going to take the current payment amount from the current payment record and then assign that, add that to the payment total amount variable. And I'm going to mark the processed checkbox true. So I want to make sure that I mark this record as processed. And as my last step, I want to add the current payment record variable values, take that whole container, add them to a record collection variable, and then create, let's say, a deck of cards or a group of containers where I keep all the field values for me to process them in a DML outside the loop. So I'm going to go through this and then make all my updates. And before I do my updates, I want to also show the totals to the user. This is where I do that. And then I also ask them, do you want to update the account name and the account status? This is my 2-column layout. And update the account with the field values that I got on the screen, if there are any changes. Update the payments. When I'm updating the payments, it's very simple. It's as simple as taking the payment record collection variable and then passing that to the database saying, do my updates. This is essentially only marking them as processed. Like the ones that I have just processed, they are going to be marked as processed. And I need to update my loan records with the payment count variable, remaining balance variable, and payment total amount variable values. That's going to get me the latest values. And I need to show the user all record updates completed successfully. So this was a lot to take in. We can talk about this. Do you have any questions?
I just have something that I want cleared up. When you say collection variable, do you mean that all the records that are associated with this loan or the payment, all the payment records associated with this loan are going to be updated?
When I say a collection variable, is that the question, collection record variable?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay, so, you know, what a record variable is actually one variable that has, that is of certain record type. For example, we can have a variable, we can have a record variable of a contact type, we can have a record variable of a payment type, we can have a record variable of a loan type. And that record variable is going to have all the fields and the field values as containers. The fields are going to be containers. It's a collection of containers, let's say, like it's like, I make the analogy of like a tray, lunch tray, or like a kitchen drawer tray or something where you hold your forks and spoons and whatever. So you are going to have a container that consists of different types of containers, like it's a group. That's your record variable. When you're talking about a collection record variable, that's n number of those trays, meaning you have multiple records that you want to hold in a container of that certain type. So what I'm doing here is, because I don't know how many times I'm going to loop through this, right? I can have 5 payments that I have not processed yet. So I want to make all the changes to the field values, and I want to assign them to a record collection variable. And I have created this one. How does this look? So when you're creating this, you define that this is a record variable, and then you need to choose the object to tell Salesforce this is a certain type of record variable, and then you check this right here. That's available for all variables. Allow multiple values, which is a collection, which means I can hold n number of those field values in this collection. And then if I do that, for me to create or update multiple records like that becomes very easy. I go to my update payment step and say, just update every field values for all the records that I have in this record collection variable. So I have ID 1 needs to get a process check true. ID 5 needs to get a process check true. And you know, all the other field values have not changed. They are there the same way, but they are going to be sent to the database to be updated in one step. That's just only one step. That's why you don't want to do your DML operations inside the loop, because if you do your DML inside the loop, what happens is you have 100 payments to be updated. You go loop 100 times, and then that's 100 DMLs. You update 100 times. Here, this is one DML. It's great for your governance limits.
There's another question. One is, what is the use of record count variable? And I think I can answer this one. It's for counting the number of payment records processed. Am I right?
Yes, it's right here. Look, record count. I need to count. What I did was I took the existing number of payments that have been processed already. I took that from the record here. I took this was 9, this was 8 before. I added 1 payment, so I took the 8, I parked it in my variable, and then when I was going through my loop, I had only 1 new payment. I counted 1, I added it here, and then I sent it to the database to be updated. This became 9. So because I want to do that, I want to count them and then update the record. I did that.
Okay, another question. If there are any failures due to the DML step, do we have a try catch like we have in Apex?
Okay, so what happens, that's a very good question. That's the kind of thing I think we should be discussing like on the developer user group. So what happens is all this, right? You know, in my order of operations, when I'm executing a transaction in Salesforce, I could have Apex triggers, I could have validation rules, workflow rules, I could have all this, whatever. This is not a trigger, but it could have been a trigger. Or I'm doing these updates, and then, you know, these updates also run some Apex triggers along with them, right? In the same transaction. So if I have an error, if I have a problem here, it is going to obviously terminate the whole transaction. First of all, nothing will commit to the database. And you will get an email as the flow creator or the system admin saying your flow ran into an issue and this is the error message you got. And, you know, the error message is going to show something like, you know, well, if it's related to SOQL, too many SOQL, if it's related to DML, you can't do this type of DML, or, you know, you hit this governance limit, whatever. So you'll get an error message, and then you can now see those. We have an interface now, a screen to show all the failed flow interviews. You could see them there as well. So there are a couple of ways you're going to find out about it. But the question was, can we actually have a catch error, and then, you know, can we have a graceful way of handling the error? I don't think so. I mean, you just don't build your flows to hit those errors. I mean, you need to build your flows respecting the error, the potential limits and the issues.
Thanks, Andy.
You're welcome. So how are we doing with this stuff? Are we okay?
I think we're okay, but there's another question as a follow-up to the previous question. What about the fault connector? Couldn't we use that to handle the
Yes. Yes, I mentioned that one. You can use the fault connector to handle that kind of stuff. The fault connector is related to one element only. So your fault connector is made available depending on, I'll show you, for example, in your get step, if you want to use a fault connector, you know what? I don't remember how to do this in my auto layout. So if you have all the connectors that you have already used, if you draw another one, that becomes your fault connector. So I can create, let's say, this new screen element screen, and then, you know, this is going to handle that. Let's say if I draw this here, that's my fault connector. So if you have an error in this step here, your fault connector is going to work and it's going to take you down this screen step, and then your user will see something, and, you know, that's useful, that's helpful sometimes. And again, the system admin or the creator of this flow will still get an error message, by the way. So if you're running this flow 1,000 times a day and you're going down that path 1,000 times, if you're the system admin, you're going to hate your inbox. So yeah, and then I went on to say, for example, if you experience a problem related to governance limits and whatever, it may or may not be related to one certain element in your flow, and that fault path could or could not work. I'm not exactly sure. So yeah, it could be instances where the fault path doesn't work for you.
Okay.
So that's what I was going to say. So if that's okay with you, let's go through some of the Salesforce Winter 22 developments and changes. Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay. So let's go through that a little bit. And I'm going to try and do that very brief. And if you have any questions, please let me know, and then we can go into the detail. So first of all, as most of you have noticed, the release notes are huge. So the Flow Builder part, the Salesforce Flow part, is underneath Einstein Automate. So under Einstein Automate, you have a section called Salesforce Flow. And also there's other cool stuff related to Flow. It's not necessarily Salesforce Flow, but this is also quite cool stuff that I haven't experimented with yet. We have, right now we have, let me just go to that section right here. Okay, so anyway, so we have actually now the MuleSoft composer that's related to automation, right? And we have the Flow Orchestrator. So those are the things that are coming. Flow Orchestrator, I think, is going from pilot to beta. It's very early on. And then there's cool stuff that's happening that's kind of like outside the Salesforce Flow header, but it's related to automation. I expect all that stuff actually to come kind of together in the end, possibly to create a single home for all kinds of automation. So let me just go back to Flow Builder here. Yeah, Flow Orchestrator beta is right here. And what the Flow Orchestrator is I think in a simple way, it's kind of like the approval process on steroids. Obviously, you can do much more than that, but the idea here is to bring multiple flows together and also leverage and use the user context, meaning, okay, well, this one person is going to run this flow, and then this other person is going to run this other flow, and then the other person is going to run a third flow. And then I want to define the conditions that connect those and the timelines, and then pass variable values in between those. Okay, Salesforce Flow section, Flow Builder, Flow debugging. Now, here, the record triggered flow now supports subflow elements. This is something that many people have been waiting for a very long time. People make very sophisticated record triggered flows, and without the use of subflows, they cannot use and reuse their certain elements, certain logic inside their flows. And then they, when it gets too big, obviously, it's very hard to maintain and manage and understand the existing flow. We get an asynchronous path now, especially when you want to connect with external systems. This is very important. We just discussed when a flow has an error inside it, when there's a fault during execution, everything abandons. But if we can create an asynchronous path inside the flow, that becomes a separate transaction. And that also becomes important when you're dealing with external systems, because that part of the equation is a little bit more unpredictable. And screen flows offer easier choice setup, custom footer labels. On my screen flow, you know how I have next? Now I can rename those buttons. We needed special components to be able to do that. That is a welcome addition. Scheduled paths now offer to-the-minute granularity. We used to be able to schedule paths, but you could only schedule paths like down to the hour, not to the minute. And outbound messages are now available as a flow core action. That was one of the most important use cases where people still wanted to use workflows, because workflows handled outbound messages, but flows didn't. Now flows can. And now we have additional flow extensions we can use to handle external services like the MuleSoft AnyPoint platform. And I think new Slack actions are coming as well. And other things that I'm forgetting. This is a good one. We were not able to roll back the changes while debugging a screen flow. We had a rollback functionality for other types of flows. That's coming. That's coming and being made available with Winter 22. And another one that's also very important, I just mentioned the scheduled paths. And now with scheduled paths, we are able to also define the batch size for the transaction. So in your record triggered flow, you can schedule a certain part of your flow to run separately, to run asynchronously, or to run, let's say, an hour after, 5 days after, whatever. And when you're running it, you can define the batch size of that certain part of the transaction. And that way, avoid hitting limits, issues, avoid locking errors. That was something that was not available in scheduled path before. One thing, the screen for record triggered flow is changing. We used to create a record triggered flow and then in our start element decide whether we wanted to trigger this flow before save or after save. Now we have actually a screen in one step where we decide this is going to be a record triggered flow, and then it is before save and after save, and they have new names for those. I'll just show you in a moment. There are some formatting in text area fields, improvements, and they are improving the auto layout format a little bit. When you were using choice elements like pick list, radio button, you had to create choices as choice components on the left panel. It was just too many clicks. Now you can go to your pick list element, pick list component, and then create all the choices right within the component, which is great. You can just start typing in yes, no, maybe, whatever. Those become choices of your choice element in your screen flow. There are some keyboard shortcuts which I have never used. I need to get with that program. I think that's going to be good. This is also a great addition. I need to explore this a little bit further. Now, there were two ways of deploying the flows before. This is a developer topic potentially we should talk about. Now, you can deploy your flow via various methods to your instance, and then you can activate it. And you can also deploy templates, right? But templates, flow templates were kind of weird. in the sense you actually deploy a template, and then you cannot really edit the template. You create a flow out of that template and then use that template. It was really weird. I never got used to it. Now they are changing that. Most flows installed from managed packages serve integral part of a larger application. Now, in the managed package, the developer can create a flow that an admin can override and use to customize parts of an application, which is great because in managed package, they couldn't touch that. They were not supposed to touch that, but now you can deploy that and then the admin can modify it. And again, we had some lightning flow components like phone, email, things like that, that worked a little bit differently than the standard text input that had multiple variables and flags that you could set and change things. But they were very old and terrible. I mean, I actually tried to avoid them as much as I could because they were really weird. They didn't show up on preview, which they fixed, I think, last release. Now, many of those components got an uplift and they got improved. So those are the winter 22 developments. Let me show you right here very quick. This is very important because that may throw you off if you see it for the first time. Now, in winter 22, you click on record triggered flow, and this is what you get. We didn't have this here. So now you can select the object that is going to trigger your flow. You can decide whether it's going to trigger on create or update or delete, and then set entry condition. And the left side, you need to choose now. The left side is fast field updates. This is your before save. And the right side is called actions and related records. This is your after save. They are trying to give us ways. They are trying to give, especially the less advanced, a better definition on when to use before save, when to use after save.
So instead of before and after, they have this fast field updates.
Yes,
Or
look,
before?
it says before here. You see in italic.
Ah, okay.
It says after, but I mean, to be honest with you, it's very confusing. This change is very confusing until people get used to it. They are going to be confused. I would have preferred them to maybe write a before save here and after save here right next to it, maybe on the title. It's a little bit weird.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, for the new beginners, this could be much better. I don't know, but for the people who have been using it, it's going to be confusing initially. And here is where you can select whether you want to run an asynchronous path. So going back to our example, let me take another 15-20 minutes. Do we have that much time or no, Farah?
Yes, we have.
Okay, let me just take another 15-20 minutes because this I walked you through that, took quite a bit of time, but it was very valuable discussion. I took you through the use case I have already created before, but what I did for today is I changed those flows. The last flow that I showed you, I changed to a record triggered flow. Then I actually used a subflow inside it to show you how that's done. So this was my screen flow that I showed you: update, account loan, and payments screen flow. So I told you there are several different ways I can actually launch this flow. I was launching that flow using the Lightning record page. So I changed this to a record triggered flow. So I said, instead of doing it that way, I want to launch this flow whenever an account record is updated. And I'm using a checkbox on the account record to do that. So if the update payments checkbox on the account record is true, I want to launch an after save flow to update everything on that account. So how would that work is I could go to Stark Industries and quickly enter a new payment. The payment record has been created. Go to Stark Industries record. This is obviously less than ideal because I need to turn off the checkbox and then turn on the checkbox. Did it update? Let me just, I got also distracted. Yeah, obviously it updated right here. This is not the flow that's active, but this is the idea, because the flow that's active has a subflow in it. This is the next step I've done with this flow. And I share this one on LinkedIn. You'll see it maybe later, or you've seen it already. So this is the flow that we have just reviewed with a few additions. Now I have also a scheduled path on this flow. So, and the way the scheduled path works is when you decide to do a scheduled path on your flow, you get the option of creating one, and you get two branches. One is the run immediately path, and the other one is a second path that you create. And this is where you say, I want to run 5 minutes, run this 5 minutes after. The reason why I said 5 minutes after is because I want to test the results really quick. Actually, in a normal scenario, you would want to probably follow up on that account a week later. And I have the option here to schedule this days after, days before, hours after, hours before, minutes after, minutes before. And the reason why I have before is I can trigger this based on when the account is updated, and I can also trigger this based on any field values that I have on the account, any date and time field values, created date, last modified date, or SLA expiration date, whatever. You can have on the opportunity, you can have the expected close date, and then you can schedule an email 1 day before the expected close date. And what I'm doing here is I'm sending an email if I'm sending an email out to the account owner or whoever is in charge, and if the account payment status equals current, then I don't send an email out. If the account payment status equals follow-up, then I send an email out for the account owner or the manager to follow up on that account. So this looks a little bit messy like this, and then, you know, I can keep building logic here, and it's going to get quite big, right? So what I have done next is I created a subflow out of this. what is a subflow essentially? Subflow is an auto launch flow. So you create an auto launch flow and define input variable or variables, and then that becomes callable once it's active. That becomes callable from any other flow. So this one here is the same flow saved as auto launch flow. And for those of you who have not experienced this, you can do this really quickly by taking the same flow. You can go to save as, and then instead of a new version, you can save this as a new flow and show advanced. And then if this was a screen flow before, you can change to a record triggered flow, auto launch flow, whatever. In this case, you want to take your record triggered flow and then save it as an auto launch flow. And then that's going to cause a couple of error messages here. And then you need to make a few changes. For example, if you're coming from a record triggered flow, you want to get rid of the dollar record references and then instead use a variable. Here, you'll see that this flow starts with get loan and it's getting the loan based on the account ID variable, and the account ID variable is marked as available for input. So when I debug this, it's going to ask me the account ID. And after I have done this, save this as a subflow, now I can clean up my main flow. This is what I called my main flow. And my main flow becomes quite zen. This is it. This is all I have in my main flow, because this is the step I'm calling my subflow now. This is winter 22. Now we can use subflow in after save record triggered flows. And all I need to do is I need to pass to the account ID input variable the dollar record ID, and the dollar record ID refers to the account record that triggered this flow. Does that make sense?
Yes, it's actually way more organized.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's way more organized. And another thing that is worth mentioning, and I can show you right here. In my schedule path advanced options, this is the one I mentioned to you. I can now set a batch size for this side of the operation. Now, for sending emails out, I don't really need to do that. It's not a big deal. But if I have a big operation going on here, let's say the left side is very big, right? It's a big operation. Now, I made that side very efficient, but let's assume that it's processing a lot of records and it's very big, and it's experiencing locking errors, potential issues with governors limits, this and that. So if I think there is something that can help this side not to experience issues, if I go and schedule it here or run it asynchronously, if I need to split this into two transactions, because if I run the right side asynchronous, or if I schedule it, it's going to become a separate transaction, then I can use this side. And if the records I'm processing and updating, let's say the payment records, you know how they were associated both with the loan record and the account record. And if the loan record is also associated with the account record, there's a potential I could experience locking issues, errors as well. That it could help with that. Now, the thing that I don't know, we had that discussion before, is I'm not 100% sure whether this side, when it's split into batches, whether it's running parallel or whether it's running like serial or something. So that could affect also the locking errors outcome. But I mean, you can experiment. The batch size thing is more of an art than science, I would say. If you're experiencing issues, you can also play with that. I think that was a lot of stuff. I think that's where I should stop. If you have any questions,
Thank you.
please let me
And
know.
it has been, yeah, it has been very beneficial. I think we are out of time, so I have to start with the Kahoot quiz.
Mhm.
So I'm going to share my screen here. And for the for the people who are not familiar with Kahoot, to access the quiz, you could go into this link, kahoot.it, or download the app on your phones. There will be 6 certification vouchers, and for the first winner, the first winner is going to have free access to Andy's flows course. So I think this first winner will be
Yes.
extremely lucky. So let's start the quiz. I'm going to send you guys the pin on the chat. So chat. I'm gonna give it one more minute and then start.